This is Ed, and welcome back to Global TV Talk Show. Our special guest is Chase ESKELSON, who's coming from the North Dallas area. He's been on our programs many times, with a focus on education and private education. Isn't that right, Chase?
Yeah, we work with all education formats. So we work with districts, we work with charters, we work with private schools, we work with EdTech companies. So kind of the whole enchilada, if you will.
That's cool. Okay. EdTech. So that rings a bell. So tell us what's going on with EdTech. I mean, that's like Zoom plus or something, right?
Yeah, you know what? That is kind of how it started, was the technology that was driving education into the 21st century. But since then, and I'll back up a little bit. I've been in EdTech for a long time, over a decade, and I was doing some cool EdTech stuff before COVID, before it became cool, right? Cool, and everyone started doing it for that year and a half or so. But it has really done a 180. It's no longer just about the technical pieces, but it's blossomed into a full industry that encompasses, yes, learning management systems, yes, student information systems, but now you've got all kinds of really cool technology pieces that have integrated themselves so deeply into the classroom that you don't even think about it as EdTech anymore. You just think of it as you would a textbook or a pencil and paper. Like it's that synonymous.
To what extent is the microschool part of that?
Yeah, MicroSchools, they're full of technology in most instances. There are a handful, surprisingly, that are very paper-based, not all about computers, which is always fun to go in and see how they have kind of taken more of a classical approach. But most of the new MicroSchools that we see popping up, they really are hybrid. I mean, they truly have that infrastructure in place for the digital component, but then there's also that in-person piece. And, that's always been one of the biggest confrontations with the full-time online schools is like, oh, there's no time for these kids to get with other kids and have that social interaction. Well, blended programs, micro schools, they solve that problem, but they keep that digital infrastructure, which is very cool.
So one of the readings, I read an article somewhere, I don't know where, but said that some big companies, Fortune 500 type companies, are setting up on their campus, in their building somewhere, space to encourage employees to enroll their kids in microschools, blended classrooms, right on premises.
Yeah, this was interesting. So I'm sure you and many people know the name Adam Newman, who started WeWork. And he started this as an opportunity for people, adults, to come in and work in the building. But then on the bottom floor, he would partner with schools in some instances. And that was kind of like the initial thoughts of it in a more modern take. And since then, a lot of companies have seen that and said, okay, we don't want to do the WeWork thing, but we do want to bring in this micro school as a perk for their employees. And interestingly, one of the things I think we've talked about on another broadcast, but nonetheless was still important, was that international companies have seen this value and said, hey, we can provide, for our American and British expats living abroad, we can still provide them with a great education. They're going to stay on, the American standards, and they're going to be ready for American colleges and universities upon graduation. And so that turned out to be a really cool perk and opportunity for a lot of those people.
So I would think this is a wonderful thing, and I was like thunderstruck by this idea. I said, boy, this is daycare, this is employee benefit, it's golden handcuffs, and mom can get, or dad can get on the elevator and go visit and show up, and maybe even take some time to be involved, because it's right there. After all, some of these large structures, these buildings are empty because people not there all the time. So it's an excellent use of space, as well as a gimme. Hey, come back to the office, bring your kid.
Well, yeah, think about one of the things that people loved. Like, we don't say this often, but what are one of those things that people loved about COVID? They loved that as they were working at home and their kids were schooling at home, they'd put it all away and sit down and have lunch as a family. Like that didn't happen before because mom and dad were at work and the kids were at school.
Right,
And,
or an
everything
hour
was moving
away
all
or something. Yeah.
yeah. But now with this opportunity and having the school on the same premises, they get that perk minus the COVID. That's 2 thumbs up.
So are these micro schools in a company, if we can just zero in on this for a second, because I see this as a terrific employee benefit and a way to compete with state-sponsored education. Not that generally I would think that is good. I grew up in that public schools, but here you have a corporate setup dedicated to continuous learning on the job, especially with the idea of reskilling, upskilling the staff, and now more than ever needed, according to the World Economic Forum. This combines everything into one thing.
Yeah, you know what? Here's the thing. A lot of people might hear you say, "Oh, it's state sponsored," and some people say that's fantastic. They get the same education they get in the States, and then some people are going to bristle at that and say, "Ooh, I'm trying to get away from that." Here's the beauty: micro schools are so it's so easy to create exactly what your employees want, and to that extent, micro schools don't have the same requirements as like a district school where everyone is on the same curriculum working at the same process and at the same timeline. So if you've got a kid who's struggling in math, the school at a district school, they're built for like your average student, right? And they're going to keep going regardless of where that student is. And so what happens? That kid gets left behind while the average student continues moving forward.
And that creates all kinds of psychological non-well-being situations.
Oh, the implications of that span much more than just math. You're 100% correct. But the benefit is in a micro school, you don't have a room full of 30 kids that are all in the same grade. You've got a room full of 15 to 20 kids maybe, and each of them is working at a different rate. And it's really, the focus is more on mastery based. And because it's a smaller size, that person, whoever is a teacher, instructor, teacher's assistant, like it doesn't matter, that person can get into the digital curriculum if they're using, that backbone and say, here's where they're struggling. I'm going to get into that specific piece that they keep missing, and I'm going to work with them through that. And so instead of you seeing kind of this thing happen, each student is their own classroom, and that teacher gets to focus on the needs of the individual learner, which you just don't get that in big schools.
So they would get special attention, even though it's a small staff. In a micro school, it's a small staff, right?
It is a small staff, but here's the beauty. You have that digital infrastructure. So when the kids come in, they sit down, they log in, they get into their learning management system, and they start going. The teacher has on her dashboard on her computer where every student is. And, Johnny might be in math. Well, Sally might be in reading. And it doesn't matter that it's not happening at the same time because the instruction piece is happening in the curriculum. And then that teacher can go say, hey, Johnny, I'm going to pull you aside really quick. Here's what you're working on. I saw you missed question number 3. Let's talk about that one specifically. And she can then pull out, her little, most of them have like a little whiteboard instead of like a big, huge whiteboard in the class. They got a little whiteboard and they can work on it together right there. And so he gets his individualized instruction while the other kids are working through their other courses. Then she goes back and says, oh, Sally, you used this word in your research paper. I don't think that meant quite what you think it does. Let's look it up in a dictionary together. And so they get to look into that. And so that's what the teacher is. She's kind of the hub, and she goes down the spoke to each student and helps them with what they need. And then what we've seen in many instances is the mornings are reserved for the actual instruction and classroom time, and then the afternoons become your tutoring time. So you can, have the other kids, they're off doing their fun electives. They're doing photography. They're doing, whatever it might be, dance, music. And you're pulling back that one student and saying, hey, Algebra 1 is tough. Like, let's talk about this for, 20, 30 minutes. And so it really customizes it to each individual student, which is just such a cool thing that technology allows us to do now.
And there's no shame or stigma connected with doing it that way.
None, because everyone's getting pulled back for different things, right? It's equally providing opportunities for kids and support. So there's absolutely none of that because everyone's talking to the teacher and they're getting exactly what that student needs. So we've talked kind of about the struggling. Let's talk about the high flyers for a second. You've got these kids who are just absolutely crushing it. They're getting fantastic scores on their work. That teacher is going to come in and say, this is too easy. They've already mastered this content. I'm going to increase the rigor level, right? The depth of knowledge. And I'm going to push this kid really hard because he can handle it or she can handle it. And so they create that pathway that makes it so the high flyers don't get bored in school, because that's what happens when your district program or your charter that builds the program to your average student, you leave out your high flyers and you leave out your low performers and you just serve the student in the middle. That's not so with MicroSchools, which is way cool.
Let's talk about money. So the MicroSchools, some of them are chartered. Are all of them chartered, which means they're free?
Yeah, so that's a common misconception. Let's clean that up first, is that people think of charters as private schools, and that's just not the case. It's a public charter school in the United States anyway, where the federal government and the state government are funding these students. It's just not through your district board. And that's a whole other conversation for a whole nother day that we can talk about. But the point is, charter schools are funded similar to how a district is funded. Now, MicroSchools, I've seen many different options. A couple of innovative districts are trying out MicroSchools as a part of their district offering. That's not kind of taking off yet, but then we've seen a lot of MicroSchools in the charter world. But I would say the majority of them, especially those that have been around for more than a year or two, they're really happening in the public sector. And so it's a private MicroSchool in many instances.
Well, thanks for clarifying that. Once again, this is Chase ESKELSON, and he lives in the North Dallas area, but as you heard him say, he's been on a plane a lot. And that's because there's a demand for new thinking in education, and that's what you're trying to do now in your new enterprise. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's been interesting to see how folks have decided that they want to think about education. And many of my clients, yes, they're education clients. You know, I've got a parent advocacy group that is just phenomenal. We should really do a show about parent advocacy. That's a whole nother topic. But there's that whole world going on at the policy and government affairs side, because we're seeing these innovative shifts with full-time online and blended and MicroSchools, and the way that the laws were written before, they were written for a district program where all the kids come to one building. Well, now you've got all these people trying to do these innovative things, and the policymakers and legislators are saying, hey, you can't do that. And they're like, hey, but this is good for kids. Well, it doesn't matter. That's against the law. Well, now we're at that time. We've got to change some of these laws to better fit the needs so that we can honor the spirit of the law versus the letter. Great example. Full-time online school. As a school administrator, I was paying a school nurse to sit in this building with a bunch of adults and twiddle their thumbs, because all the kids were remote around the state of Texas. And so we went to Austin and said, look, this is not okay. I have a nurse that's not serving students. Let us work with the spirit of this law to serve students across the state. And so we were able to work with a nursing staffing agency to do health screenings all across the state versus having one paid person sit there and twiddle their thumbs around a bunch of adults.
Oh, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Hey, let's talk about something else. On November 30th coming up, and today, what day is today? 22nd. So in a week or so, I'm producing a California-based show, but not everybody's from California. We have people from around the world going to be on that program. But we're using California as a mecca because the GDP has exploded the past 2 or 3 years. And so California has become, according to the people who measure this stuff, in terms of GDP, in other words, cost of goods and value of the goods, product sold or whatever, in California has brought it to be a larger economic entity than Germany, which is huge, of course. Number 4 in the world, top US and then China and then Japan, and then used to be Germany, but now it's California and then Germany, and then France and others are down there. But so I'm focusing in on California, not only because I live here, but think and breathe California too all the time, other than Maui perhaps. But we'll talk about Maui in a minute and education there. And how can people who live in paradise get educated? But we'll talk about that at another time. So would you like to be my guest and meet some of these high-powered HR people um, on November 30th, starting at 9 a.m., you're 11.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
send you the link so you can see the outline.
That'd be great. Yeah.
No, because this topic that we just stumbled upon here of in company location using that empty space now or underutilized space, and in an effort to bring people back in to socialize and generate esprit de corps within a company which has been missing. This is a great idea, especially with funding from the company, or they could be tax
Mhm.
sheltered somehow also. I'm not an accountant, but certainly that could be figured out.
Yeah.
Anyway, that would
Well,
be the idea. It's just well, first of all, you'll meet some people, and second of all, you're going to get a worldwide audience for what you're doing. So I think it's a win-win.
yeah, it makes good sense because that's the beauty of this type of a school model, right? It does not have to be a cookie cutter approach where we stamp out the same thing. It's all right, what space do you have? How many employees do you have? And we'll custom build something together it's very easy to do with the technology, EdTech options and products that we have available to us today.
So we'll talk about this offline, but there's the wheels are turning here. I'm inspired. I haven't had breakfast yet, but I've had my first cup of coffee. So we'll see what happens in an hour from now. I might go to sleep, but um, so tell me more about your recent travels. We don't have a lot of time, but because I know you've been all over the place, so we have 5 minutes or so. Where have you just been? And give me a highlight in each of those locations from each of those locations.
Yeah, so I started last week at the Excellence in Education conference, which is Jeb Bush's conference, and he brings policymakers, the R's, the D's, everyone together to just talk about true educational opportunity
Good
and
idea.
where the
Yeah.
industry is really going to move forward over the next decade.
I'll bet
And
you can get
really,
Obama. I bet you can get Obama involved in that. He's looking for things to do.
yeah, it was a really interesting conference. I mean, they had some speakers in that they really pushed and prodded at the way that we think about education and how we need to really update the way that we think. The way that we went to school is not how these kids are going to go to school.
Yeah, right.
And that if they want to be successful in life in 2030, 2040, 2050, they need to have a different type of education than 30 kids in a classroom all sitting in rows looking forward at a teacher drilling and killing.
So
And so,
the wheels are turning. Excuse me for interrupting, but dyslexia. This is a major problem in kids, and a lot of kids hide it because they don't want to look like they're stupid or something.
mhm.
But they're just getting things backwards. It's like they're hearing the same words that you and I are hearing, but for some reason these people, and I happen to know one person like that, but and that's why I'm bringing it up because it's a concern. The words are not understood in how I
Mhm.
would understand it. Not that I'm a guru. I'm not, but so how are kids? Because that's where it all starts, and that's where it could be corrected much easier than at this age. So are you taking? I mean, that's special needs, right? That kind of
Mhm.
remediation.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, there was a fantastic session where we talked about this last week a little bit, and I'm by no means an expert in this area, but I can give you a little bit of feedback from kind of my experience. There
Thank
are
you.
some really neat upcoming EdTech products that are coming out to help solve this. And the thing that I love about these new products versus the stuff that people have been hawking on schools for the last decade is they understand that there still has to be that human element. There still has to be the teacher behind the product. So the product isn't the end all be all. The product is a tool that goes in the teacher's tool belt to help the student. And I think that's a major shift that we're seeing right now because so many people have thought, this product will cure your student. Well, products don't cure students, but a tool in the hand of a skilled teacher can help that student really move the world in order to get further and further.
Move that
in their
needle.
reading ability and literacy.
To measure it and for the need and to watch for signals and then do something. This happens. Oop, that's time to turn that button or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that was really interesting, and that was a great conference. And then from there, I spent a short time in California before jumping on an airplane down to Mexico City. So a little international trip. And I've got a client who has built phone apps without having to know how to code. And it's really revolutionary. No code phone app creation. And we went down there to talk about where is the industry? How does this fit into the K through 12 market? How do we use this to engage students into STEM or STEAM? How do we get kids at that entry level to really then go and take off and do more of that hardcore coding and programming? But how do we get them interested? And they're building such cool they're using like the basis of Yelp or some of these apps, and they build their own version of app. And my favorite story that we heard this weekend was a kid used the framework of Yelp so he's doing this as an elective course. He built this app for his science project where they're studying dinosaurs right now. And so they put all the dinosaurs into the Yelp database and had the entire school vote on their favorite dinosaurs, and it, upvoted and downvoted and left comments, and it was so cool. Like that's just amazing to see that this kid built an app, used it not only in his elective course, but in his core science course, and then got the entire school involved. Like that is so cool. That's something you can put on your resume. I've built an app. It had 300 users. That's awesome.
Right, at no cost. So I need an app. And I don't know how to code. And I have no money to pay for anything. So, but I think I can learn from this kid.
Yeah, it was very cool.
That's called upskilling. Cool. Take a kid like that and say, okay, here's an old man he's got a, how does he do that?
Oh, hilarious. Yeah.
Oh, anyway, I really enjoy this time with you. Thanks for being, again, my guest on Global TV Talk Show. Chase ESKELSON, what's your website?
Yeah, so the company's name is Fersken Education. So it's Fersken, FERSKENED.com, ferskened.com.
And this is Ed. Goodbye.